I'm fine. I'm very busy. Every hour seems to bring new, additional news. We now know the president-elect of the United States was being spied on, that his phone conversations were bugged and recorded. And I suspect we're going to learn, kind of like Watergate, we're going to learn a lot more. It may take some time, but the president's claims that he was under surveillance turns out to be true.
That's true. It's fascinating times. You were a veteran of the Watergate era. Could you tell me a bit about how some of the similarities and differences between, the situation back then and what's going on now for those of us who maybe weren't around to watch that?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important that 1968 and 2016 were very similar politically in many ways. Um, in 1968, the Vietnam War had destroyed the credibility, really, of the Washington establishment. We had one party rule since 1960, and the anger in the country and the disillusionment and with the among the silent majority, the so-called forgotten Americans, a constituency that included not only Republicans but a very substantial of white working class Democrats, was very similar to both the atmosphere that Donald Trump, was able to exploit to get elected, but it also it was the same voter groups where, for example, Trump was always able to run marginally stronger among union member white Democrats than, say, Mitt Romney by +5.
Mm.
And that's there is the difference. Both Nixon's success in forging this new coalition of the angry voter against the establishment, an anti-establishment theme, and Trump in many ways does the same thing. Just as leaders, Donald Trump and Nixon are similar. They're both really pragmatists. Neither is an ideologue. They're both essentially populists with, conservative instincts. They are both interested in what will work. They're willing to think outside the box. They're both master negotiators. Nixon got a strategic, arms limitation agreement with the Russians. He got, an agreement, a cooperation agreement with the Chinese. He ended the Vietnam War. He is I think he is a negotiator. Trump, in his own way, is a negotiator. Both of them are very persistent. Both of them have to come back from disaster. Nixon comes back from political ruin. Trump comes back from near, financial collapse. Both very stressful. Both of them bounce back because of their persistence, because of their resilience, I guess is what I would say.
What would you say was, and also they were both well known to the American public at the time that they ran, which I think was important.
An enormous point. That's a very good observation. Nixon, of course, in 1960 has near universal name ID because he has served for 8 years as vice president. He has run once for president. He has then run for governor in the largest state in the country. So by 1968, he is universally known. So it is with Donald Trump. After the 15th season of The Apprentice and Trump's many, many years of public promotion, he also begins the campaign with universal name identification and a universally well-known public image.
Mm-hmm. and younger observers, I think, I think people nowadays tend to think of Nixon only in terms of Watergate, and I think a lot of folks forget how intelligent he was and what a broad view.
Well, I think it's beyond that. I mean, let's look for a moment at his presidency. He ended the Vietnam War much faster than the Pentagon and his military and his NSA wanted to. He skillfully, basically, circumvents the hardliners in his own administration and opens a dialogue with China, which ultimately leads to recognition and dialogue. He, as I said, gets a SALT agreement negotiation with the Russians. He desegregates the public schools without violence or bloodshed. He saves Israel in the 1973 Yom Kippur War. He desegregates the public, the construction unions. He forms the Environmental Protection Agency. He reforms Native American rights so that American Indians can get their land and their rights back. And he does a lot in the area of, for example, drug addiction, alcoholism, and so on in that community. So he has a very progressive and quite successful presidency. But yes, all people think about is Watergate.
Yeah. Noam Chomsky once referred to Nixon as our last liberal president, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, no, I think it is.
That gets to pragmatism, as you were saying.
Yeah, I think that there are certainly some things, and on some things he is definitely true. The Nixon administration had right and left wings. Nixon liked to listen to a broad cross section of ideas before he made decisions. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, later Democrat senator from New York, pushed very hard for a social program which essentially would have given people, guaranteed payments, an entire new entitlement, really. Nixon would initially embrace it and then realize it was unworkable, and he would retreat. So, but he did, I think, achieve many great things. He also made a number of really, really bad decisions. The war on drugs has been an ignominious mistake. It's expensive. There is no reform. We're destroying lives. There's no such thing as rehabilitation. It's endlessly expensive to the taxpayers because we are incarcerating people for nonviolent crimes. We don't spend any. It's a health problem. It is not a crime problem.
That's true.
The other one I'd have to point to is the closing of the gold window, taking us off the gold standard. A terrible idea, which John Connolly helped talk Nixon into, and then, of course, lastly, wage and price controls, which seems to completely violate, Richard Nixon's previous position as kind of a Chamber of Commerce Republican Orthodox conservative. Overnight he decides he's a Keynesian, and again, John Connolly talked him into that mistake.
That's a name that pops up a lot back then. Your book does a really great job of kind of explaining the coalition that Trump was able to build en route to the presidency. And we're looking at it retrospectively. When you go back to the beginning of the campaign, did it seem possible? Like, I'm fascinated by, there were 16 other Republican candidates who were veteran senators and governors, and the ease with which he carved through those people, it's still fascinating. Did it seem possible at the beginning?
Well, it certainly seemed more than possible to me, but let's recognize that I'm a professional political operative, and I have, at that point, 9 individual presidential campaigns in which I'm playing a senior role as experience. And also, I've known Donald Trump for 39 years. I have a very keen understanding of his management style, his style in the stump. And, I have many years of looking at polling information, analyzing what people, think and know about Trump. So I understand a lot of the basics about his appeal. Back when I worked for the Trump Casino Company, they would spend a substantial amount of money on survey research trying to examine why people went to their casino or how they could convince more people to come to their casino. But when you found out why, you learned it was all about Trump. So that data helped you learn a lot about what it was about Trump that appealed to people. I had seen in 2012, and even in as early as 2000, when Donald Trump considered briefly the Reform Party, I'd already seen the magnetism. I'd already seen the charisma and the craziness, the wildness that would come up in terms of excitement. Trump is a larger than life figure. Bottom line, Trump is a giant, and he ran against a group of career politicians who were essentially pygmies.
Yeah, and they folded so quickly. Yeah, I was especially.
Well, I always think that it's always difficult to fight somebody who might do anything. I mean, did Jeb know that Trump was going to? Pardon me. Did Jeb know that Trump was going to challenge the idea that George W. kept us safe on 9/11? That little piece of hypnotism.
That is so.
Or
true.
that. Or did anybody think? And I know this. If Jeb had stayed in the race and there had been another debate, Trump was prepared to say, Jeb, the Florida FDLC, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, had over 22 individual tips about the 9/11 hijackers training in Sarasota. You seem to have done nothing with that information. Don't you think you could have stopped the attack on Vera? Have you actually done something? That was coming, and I think Jeb knew it was coming. And it's of course all documentable.
Wow.
So and only Trump would have the courage to do something like that.
That's true.
I mean, it's just like Trump getting out there 2 Fridays ago, whatever it was, and saying they were wiretapping Trump Tower.
Yeah.
And some of his more lily-livered advisors are trying to get him to walk it back or issue an apology, but that's not Trump. His source was good, and he turned out almost already to be proven correct.
Yeah, one thing I've found really, really interesting about his style, not just as a candidate, and I guess it really started from the moment he announced now to the present, is he's done such a good job of driving the narrative and pretty much forcing the whole political culture to engage its own audience on Trump's terms. They may not they don't agree with necessarily with what he's saying, but he talked about the wiretaps a couple of weeks ago, and that has been the story since then.
The person who always wins is the person who dominates the dialogue. The person who sets the dialogue in terms of what you're going to talk about.
Yep. Let's see. Let me ask you about Florida real quick. Do you think actually before I get to Florida, what do you think about the Bernie Sanders campaign? To any extent, do you think Bernie helped weaken Hillary?
Well, first of all, it confirms what we think about Trump's nomination. And in many ways, Bernie and Donald Trump they're riding the same wave. Donald's voters think these trade deals have fucked America, and Bernie's voters think these trade deals have fucked America.
Mm-hmm.
Donald's voters think that illegals are taking jobs that should be going to Americans. Bernie Sanders supporters think illegals are taking jobs that should go to Americans. Donald Trump does not think we should rush it off to foreign wars, spending American money and lives, unless we can demonstrate that we have some specific inherent national purpose or interest. And Bernie Sanders voters are also anti-war and think, you say, Iraq was, we had no real public interest, national interest in being involved. So, and they're also new voters. Both Trump and Bernie Sanders attract new voters in the primaries for the same reason. It's just more people upset about the so-called rigged system. Bernie brags constantly about the corruption and the power of Wall Street. So does Trump.
Yes.
Trump is out there saying these hedge fund operators, they should pay the same tax rate as everybody else who's making money on Wall Street. Why are he getting these big breaks and paying almost nothing?
That's true.
So I think their appeal is very similar. And in the end, as my book, The Making of the President, determines, in order to win, Trump had to win 3 out of 10 Sanders voters, and he did.
Mm-hmm. I have a lot of friends who are non-voters. They're, millennials and not paying attention, and they say, "Oh, it's boring, it's rigged." And I would say to them over and over again, if Trump versus Hillary doesn't make you interested in politics, nothing is. It's a hopeless case.
If our choice had been Jeb Bush versus Hillary Clinton, and that was the choice, the people telling you that would be entirely justified.
Sure.
Why would anybody bother to vote?
Mm-hmm.
They're co-conspirators. They've stolen together. They're both, they both run these fraudulent charities in which they suck out millions, but nobody really gets helped. Most certainly true in the earthquake situation in Haiti. So I think voters just tired of let me put it this way. It's not just that the political elites have pushed and provided policies that have made people poorer and less safe. It's that the people who have done this in their cronies have gotten fabulously wealthy while doing it.
Yes.
It's the politics of resentment. They're killing me with my tax rate, but the hedge fund billionaire guys pay almost no taxes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from that point of view, this is the same politics of resentment that was utilized by Richard Nixon to build a coalition of people who, unlike here's the thing. Trump voters have jobs. Trump voters go to church. Trump voters go to school. Trump voters don't run down the country. Trump voters mostly don't demonstrate. They don't shout. They really are the silent majority. But despite the fact that Hillary spent $2 billion and had the TV networks wired spending millions of their own, because all of the news coverage was really de facto campaign advertising for Hillary, plus she had, the folks at Google and Facebook, for example, screwing with their logarithms to limit the reach and access to the internet of Donald Trump. Despite all of that, she still lost.
Yes.
In other words, the old media was rigged in her favor. Even the new media was rigged in her favor. And she still lost. That just gives you some idea of the intensity of how angry and dissatisfied the Trump voter is.
She and her team, did they ever really understand what they were dealing with in Trump? It seemed to me like they didn't take, at least publicly, like they didn't really take him seriously until it was well too late. You know?
Yeah, no, I think they made the exact same mistake as Jimmy Carter. If you go look at the biography of Hamilton Jordan, who was, Jimmy Carter's chief of staff, he goes on and on about how they really wanted to run against Ronald Reagan. And that turns out to be the great miscalculation of all time. Yes, I think the Clintons misunderstood Trump's appeal. They didn't think that his simpler messaging would be credible. They don't understand that Trump talks more like average people than elites. So I think they underestimated both his skill as a candidate. They underestimated his skill as a communicator, and they underestimated his ability to land a punch.
Yeah, which he could do that. To any extent, is that maybe a factor of the Beltway mentality or the New York mentality, in the sense of, maybe not understanding what such a large portion of the country was thinking and feeling?
No, well, that's part of it, yes.
Because they spend to spend that much money and lose is, it's...
Look, the Clintons basically think that all the smart people in this country live in New York or Los Angeles. They look down on the flyover country because they think those people are a bunch of dumb hicks. They also think they're so clever that they can use paid television to manipulate those dumb hicks into voting the way they want. Why would they believe this? Because they have successfully done it before. They just misunderstood that those people were now on to the fact that the mainstream media, when they say things bad about Trump, they're in the tank. They're partisan. That's not news. They just forward, or I should say push, the political establishment's narrative of things. We've never had that kind of skepticism. More people in polls saying they don't believe CNN than that they do for the first time ever. And you have obviously the access to alternative media, which funds Trump's messaging. See, the combination of his messaging purposely being brash and provocative to generate coverage is the Trump style, and you have access through the alternative media. 2016 is the year in which the mainstream media loses its hammerlock, its monopoly on political, the dissemination of political information, because the technological advance of the handheld device and the fact that more voters are watching their news there than on a television set, it's opened a whole new world of communication, which has, given us a more democratized system with a small d.
And the mainstream media has struggled for a long time to reckon with the power of the internet anyway. A lot of daily papers and magazines fell by the wayside because they couldn't figure out how to make the technology work for themselves.
Well, first of all, there's the cost. A cable news network has hundreds of millions of dollars in overhead to broadcast by cable, when you could take the same quality show, post it on the internet, and reach everybody far more cheaply. Infowars.com. You may not agree with, you may even disdain Alex Jones's politics, but you cannot disdain the fact that he is reaching literally millions of people every week.
Yeah. It's very similar to what Rush Limbaugh was able to do in the 90s.
Yeah, in terms of radio, it's very similar.
Here's a question for you. How does the Florida political scene look to you right now? Do you have any read on who you think the next governor will be?
I'm not sure I understand the context.
Oh, just I know you spend a lot of time in Florida, as do I. And next year is the midterm election, and a lot of seats are up for grabs around the country, including the governor of Florida. I'm writing for a Florida paper today, so I was hoping to ask you a little bit
Yeah.
about.
Well, look, Florida has proven yet again to be the ultimate purple state. It truly is a state that is always competitive in a presidential race, and less competitive, you'd have to say, leaning slightly Republican in a non-presidential race. The Democrats in Florida, because they have been out of power in the legislature so long, and because they have, generally speaking, not done well in local offices, they really have no bench. They're yet to come up with a candidate who is a viable candidate for governor. It's way too early to try to determine how Trump's candidacy will impact the Florida electorate. It's an entirely open question. Trump could be exceedingly popular if he sticks to his agenda and gets things done by the midterms, or he could be unpopular, theoretically, for any number of reasons. But in politics, a year is a lifetime. And therefore we can't really speculate what the elections then will be. We just don't know enough.
That's true. And it remains to be seen how Trump will continue to execute his agenda. And there's of course the possibility that something could go wrong and it could trigger a backlash, say among like this large base that he's put together. Do you think Democrats would? Do you say if Trump were to make mistakes and there were something of a backlash to him, do you think Democrats would be capable of exploiting that vulnerability to take seats back?
Just wait. Too many hypotheticals in there for me to answer the question.
Sure.
All I would say is that it's obvious that Donald Trump has a far different leadership style than any president we've had before. But try to put it in some context. They said Andrew Jackson was vulgar, an ignoramus, a bully, a hothead, crude, and so on. He was one of our greatest presidents. They said that Theodore Roosevelt was a lightweight, that he was an egomaniac, that he was a press hog and a self-promoter, and he also turned out to be one of our greatest presidents. You just can't judge, a couple months into a presidency, how the president's style will work, what he will achieve, and how this will all end. You can't decide whether he's, a viable candidate for re-election or a cinch for re-election, or whether he will have no prospect for re-election, depending on how much, again, he gets done. Donald Trump's a man of action. Trust me, he gets it. He understands that you can't, spend 4 years learning where the men's room is. He's
results oriented.
He's very results oriented, and that can-do spirit, that confidence, I think, is a major factor in people voting for him. He exudes it. So anyway, there is that. What else?
Well, have you heard from Congress yet?
No, I have not. Well, other than the one letter from the Senate asking me to preserve documents, which I am doing, I've had no formal contact with the House Intelligence Committee. I've seen several Democrats on the committee putting on statements that I should be called, but that's because they all wanted to get their name in the paper. And I'm more famous than they are.
Yes.
They dragged my name through the mud in a public hearing. Several of the statements made by members of that were just flatly incorrect. Others were chronologically in order, and third others were written in such a pejorative way that I must have a chance to take that language and retell it my way and then bitch slap the member for his partisanship.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, back channel intermediary mutual friend. Can you deny they're all the same thing? They're all the same thing.
Yeah.
If one is giving a speech to 300 people and they want to use a more powerful word, you'd say back channel. If you're sitting with a reporter one-on-one and say exactly who was it you were talking to through to, and you'd say, oh, a mutual friend. Yeah. So, I mean, they use the most pejorative language. But what I really like is where they accuse me of a crime, because here's my proposal.
Yes.
Congressman Eric Swalwell, you accuse me of a crime. Waive your congressional immunity so I may sue you, and we'll let a judge and jury decide whether you have slimed me.
Oh wow!
And you know they won't do that. So
no, they won't.
It's easy to attack me with half truths and partial truths and misleading statements when you have congressional immunity. So therefore, my only redress, my only opportunity is, it is only fair that I be allowed to face my accusers and respond to these questions.
Yeah.
In the same, and not behind closed doors, in a public forum,
right.
The same place that they dragged my name through the mud. That's the American way.
Absolutely.
In our jurisprudence system, the ability to be shown the evidence and accuse your and face your accusers is a guaranteed constitutional right. We don't have secret courts in this country, or do we?
Yeah.
And if I was, in fact, under surveillance, as I believe I was and am, say hello to the boys at the FBI right now.
Hello.
Then what was your probable cause or your evidence that would justify that violation of my civil rights? You're tapping a U.S. citizen. Show me an email or some evidence that I was in touch with a real Russian and involved in collusion. They may call me a dirty trickster. I'm a real partisan. I've got sharp elbows. Mm-hmm. But there's one thing that isn't in my bag of tricks. Treason.
Yeah. You're a pretty straightforward guy. You're open about your views and your activities. It's kind of fun. This is the fourth book of yours that I've read. I didn't read the LBJ book, but I read the Bush book, the Clinton book, and the Nixon book, which I really like. The Trump book. The Nixon is still maybe my favorite, but for me it's been fun, like talking with my friends, like a lot of my younger journalist colleagues. They weren't familiar with you until recently, and they would go back and read the reviews, and they find you fascinating.
That's kind. My book on Nixon has essentially been overhauled. I found out a lot of things I did not know when I wrote it about the Watergate break-in, about secret meetings between Sirica and the prosecutors, ex-parte meetings, meetings between Sirica and the circuit court judge, also illegal. Both of them, had they been known at the time, would have thrown the Watergate burglary case out of court. Would have been over. There's too much plotting to kill Nixon, and they break all kinds of rules. So I added all that, and I've reworked it substantially. The new title is Tricky Dick, The Rise and Fall and Rise of Richard M. Nixon.
Ooh, I will check that out.
And you can already see the new cover. It's up on Amazon.
The Trump book has been out since January 31st, I believe. How have sales been? Has all the attention
it's been doing quite good. It was number 17. It was an Amazon bestseller. It was number 17 on Publishers Weekly's bestseller list. I noticed a couple weeks ago that the number 14 and 15 slots on the New York Times bestseller list, which are the last two slots, the 15 slots, they both have a Nielsen book scan rating that week that is lower than mine. Now, theoretically, Nielsen is supposed to account for 80% of all book sales in that time period, and therefore, doing the math, it would be highly unlikely that either one of these books sold more than mine did. So the New York Times, who has never reviewed any of my books, is not above playing games. I actually think, as you recall, they tried this on Ted Cruz, and he sued them, and I believe he won.
It's a fun read. You know, presidential campaigns are so complex. I think you do a really great job of making this complex subject matter accessible, and it's a fun read. You know,
All right. I'm glad it worked for you.
Yeah, I mean, one would not expect like a book about politics to be good beach reading, you know. But
well, I try for that. I mean, my book on LBJ kind of reads like like a murder mystery, because that's really what it is.
Absolutely.
All right, I got to move along.
All right.
Is there anything else that comes to mind?
Oh no, we've got it all. I appreciate it.
All right, great. Many thanks.
Yeah, you have a good day.
I look forward to it.
For sure.
Bye.
Bye.